Fortress Europe, Shattered Dreams. In the interview, Integration Commissioner for Berlin, Monika Lüke.
Ms. Lüke, hundreds of African migrants have drowned off the Italian island of Lampedusa. Is European refugee policy a failure?
That's the problem. Unfortunately, there is no European refugee policy. It exists formally, but the fact is that Europe closes itself off too much. Refugees in European waters have to be rescued. EU law says so. But that isn't done. Formally, there is a European refugee policy. But in practice, member states actually have very differing standards. In Greece and sometimes in Italy, they don't live up to the Geneva Convention on Refugees.
The mayor of Lampedusa is a very dedicated woman. She does a lot, as one can see almost every day. Do you think the Italian government is doing enough?
No, it's not. That's a big problem. The Italians are not fulfilling the Geneva Refugee Convention. When refugees arrive in Italy, they are immediately prosecuted for illegal entry. The refugees stay on Lampedusa and are not sent on to the Italian mainland. However, the Italian government does send the refugees on to other European nations. I would like to see German politicians involved in the discussion have words with their Italian counterparts. The ambassador here in Berlin should be called in for consultations.
Do you think the refugee problem is too much for the Italians?
That can't really be, because proportionally, Germany has more refugees than Italy. In Italy, all refugees are brought to Lampedusa and kept there.
No matter where they land.
It causes huge problems on the island and does not promote a fair refugee policy in Italy.
But anyone traveling in Italy can't miss seeing the obviously illegal African migrants selling souvenirs on every beach. They seem to have got out of Lampedusa and onto the mainland. Is that possibly a reason why the Italian government insists on concentrating the refugees on Lampedusa and deporting them as quickly as possible?
As far as I can see, Italy does not have more refugees than other European countries do. Malta has a big problem, so does Greece. But the Italians don't look after the refugees.
You say Europe has a refugee and asylum policy, at least formally. It's based on the principle that all refugees have to be processed by the countries they arrive in. Should we revise that and say perhaps that no matter where they land, EU-wide quotas must be applied?
That's the right idea. I can't imagine a system something like the established quotas among Germany's federal states. That would provide a fairer solution in Europe. Each country would have to take in a number of refugees corresponding to its share of the EU population. I don't think that's enough. We should also make it possible for people to submit applications in Africa, Asia, and Latin America to enter Europe on humanitarian grounds. Even if the people don't formally qualify as refugees. By that, I mean the so-called economic migrants. They're not persecuted politically and have no entitlement for asylum, but it's still a legitimate issue. At present, they have no chance. Those are the people we see on Lampedusa. And the European Union would do well to create possibilities of steering the influx. Ultimately, Europe needs these people because of demographic change. Europe is depopulating. We need more skilled workers. And many of these people have had some kind of decent training.
You've said that perhaps we need to rethink the definition of asylum. Asylum is actually a sacred right. It helps the politically persecuted first and foremost. Do we Europeans really have to take the idea of a political refugee and make it into a more general kind of refugee? Then we'd have to reset the admissions criteria.
I don't think so. It's important to make the distinction. There really is political asylum, a fundamental right, which goes way back, and which many people in Germany benefited from in the past. That's asylum. And we should leave it alone. If we expand it, I fear we would dilute it. Instead, we must create additional possibilities to come to Europe. That would include humanitarian reasons. For me, economic need is definitely humanitarian grounds, but it must be distinguished from asylum.
Would you advocate a quota model? If criteria were put into place making it possible to apply for asylum abroad, Europe would most likely have to take in hundreds of thousands every year.
I believe we have to establish transparent criteria, set conditions, and then a flexible quota really would be the only approach. But I do think a quota would be the right way forward.
So you would combine refugee policy with a targeted immigration policy?
I want a refugee policy on the one hand and a targeted immigration policy on the other. Beyond that, it would be important and sensible to conduct immigration policy proactively for highly qualified specialists. There are all kinds of possibilities. Those are 3 models in all, but they're all needed. One does not cancel out the other.
You've said that Europe could use skilled workers from Africa. That's surely correct, but would also presuppose that language courses are offered in these countries of origin. Not everyone speaks Finnish, Estonian, German or Czech.
Exactly. Language is the key to integration. If we get the people, if they come to us, they must be integrated, integrate themselves. And language really is the key to that. That's why I think it's good that the city-state of Berlin, my employer, is now going to offer language courses for asylum applicants, tolerated refugees. We should expand that further, because most of these people really will stay here.
Fortress Europe is an expression that pretty much captures the European Union's asylum and refugee policy. The Union always thought it's better to solve the problems that make people want to migrate in the first place. Since the 1960s, development aid policy was always defined as an attempt to fight the causes of poverty and other reasons why people leave home. Has this approach failed?
No, but it's not enough. And it won't suffice in today's world, where the media show images of a Europe where flights keep getting cheaper. And unfortunately, development cooperation will never completely eliminate economic need and armed conflict in developing countries. However, without development cooperation, the influx would be far greater.
Some African development experts criticize European and global development aid by saying it would be far better if African countries received no aid. Then they'd be forced to stand on their own feet. You believe that's a radical and possibly misdirected idea?
Good development cooperation helps build up democratic structures, good governance, and helps educate people. For me, all that legitimizes development cooperation.
legitimiert für mich die Entwicklungszusammenarbeit.
And if there is no work, the only chance is to move elsewhere. Let's not call it fleeing, but immigration instead. Do you think we have to look to the Canadians as a model and say we want targeted immigration, not refugee immigration? Do we need the courage to say that's what we want?
Wir sind gar nicht so weit weg von den Kanadiern.
We're not that far apart from the Canadians. Our immigration law has quite a lot of opportunities for coming to Germany. It's relatively liberal. We have openings for specialized workers, for professions with shortages, for caregivers, for freelancers. Those are liberal regulations, not restrictive ones. I don't think you can compare Germany to Canada simply because the German language isn't spoken globally. That still keeps some people from coming to Germany.
Germany's Labour Minister sometimes says, based on her long time having lived in the US, that we need a welcoming culture. Not just a new welcoming culture, but one for foreigners, for immigrants, for aliens. Is that what we need?
Wir brauchen die. Wir brauchen sie aber nicht dem Namen nach.
We do need that, and not only on paper. A welcoming culture has to be lived. It has to be lived by people, by neighborhoods, church congregations, Muslim communities, and sports clubs.
Wir brauchen dringend eine Willkommenskultur, vor allen Dingen in den deutschen Behörden.
Ms. Lüke, thank you.
Gerne.